This is how 4 friends and I collaborated to recreate Hakari's domain expansion, Idle Death Gamble, or Restless Gambler. This is going to be an in-depth storytime type video where I break down the creative direction, the research, and how everything came together. If you're wanting a tutorial or breakdown on how to actually create the gates or the domain expansion involved, those will be posted on Axel's channel, so search for a_pals. And this is a reminder that I do have a YouTube channel for those of you who aren't watching this from YouTube, so these long form videos will be posted on our YouTube channel. So initially this domain expansion was never going to happen. I've been asked to recreate it for about 2 years, but I don't live by a subway. Surprise! I also don't really have too many photography and videography friends. So if you were to take all of the photo and video friends that I have and all the ones who actually live by a safe subway that I can shoot in, that would be close to none. And even then, that would be a lot of work and coordination and travel that I don't even get paid for. And I'm not gonna harp on it, but just a reminder, a lot of people love to complain and harp about what content and what characters cosplayers do without actually giving cosplayers the money and resources that they need to pull these things off. So next time you want to criticize how a cosplayer does something, ask yourself how you're actually helping them to bring your vision to life. Once I came to terms with not having a subway, I thought, could I use VFX to make a subway? Me personally, I cannot. Contrary to belief, I don't really do extensive VFX work. I don't really specialize in world building and creating objects, and I don't really just do things just to do them. Because I could just replace the background of my video with random subway footage, but that would look ugly. And I don't really like doing ugly. And yes, I've done a bunch of scene remakes so far, but sometimes that gives the illusion that RJ can just do anything. And I definitely cannot. In terms of VFX and content creation, I think my strengths are really figuring out what my limits are and working within those limits. A lot of my VFX actually use a bunch of practical effects and planning, and manipulating all the knowledge I've gained about light and color through art lessons as a kid to figure out what I need to make happen. So I'm not good enough yet to make whatever I want whenever I want, at least not by myself. As time went on this past year, my editing skills did get a lot better. I found my ideas being less and less limited by my incompetence, and as I was also growing, my friend Axel started to learn how to use Blender, which is a free software where you can actually create things. And he pretty much just did a deep dive. Every day he gave himself a project and started learning how to do a bunch of stuff. Around the time that he was really getting into Blender is when I started to play my Sukuna cosplay, and I started to realize that at the rate that both of us are growing with our editing techniques and visualization, if there's something that I wanted to do that was slightly outside of my range, if I gave us just a couple of months to focus and figure out what the missing link is, we could probably figure it out and bring the vision to life. And at that point, I started to plan my content not just around what I can do, but around things that I could eventually do. A couple of examples include the Fire Arrow by Sukuna. I had no idea how I was going to edit that, and then eventually I figured it out. And then Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine, which was made by Axel. But as I was filming it, I just thought, I don't even know if this shot is going to be possible. After multiple projects of us working together and combining our skills, I was like, hey, so one day in theory, since you've made an entire domain expansion, would you be able to create some train doors? And that way I could use them in Hakari's domain expansion. And the ironic part is that he loves trains. Like, he was a train kid, he loves learning about trains. So it worked out. He was already learning about train stations and train related stuff in the world of Blender. Next thing you know, it's September, our schedules open up a bit, and Axel told me that he could probably have the train doors created by mid to late September. For me, that was perfect. I'm in no rush. I just had some content filmed. I can edit it whenever. And then boom, I got reached out to create a promo video for a new song. And they were suggesting that I cosplay in this video. And at the time, I was only cosplaying one character because of the hair and the eyebrows and the mustache. So obviously the content would be centered around him. But I have been making a ton of Hakari content for like a month and a half. So I really want to avoid just making a transition video where I pop up and I'm like, it's me. I wanted this opportunity to be a reason for me to expand further with the lore of this character and add something fresh to my content. I do see when people tag me in memes and sounds and videos of other content creators and ask me to collab with them. And I love duetting, I love collabing, but I don't just mindlessly collab people most of the time. For me, it has to be fun, or there has to be some sort of reason or addition to whatever I'm doing. So I won't, for example, duet every single Kirara cosplayer who are all using the same viral sound, because for me, it's just lacking some enthusiasm and originality to do the exact same thing with each person. Or I could be using the brain power that I'm using to figure out how to make each duet unique by just making a different video altogether. So then I was like, hey Axel, what if you had a week to create those train doors? Do you know you have 30 minutes? The significance behind this is he didn't just have a week to make something. He had a week to like learn and understand and create something he has never done before. I am a terrible person. But after some planning, begrudgingly, we were like, okay, let's do this. Plot twist, I know nothing about trains. I began to reread the manga panels and really diligently looking at every single detail, and then I realized those aren't train doors, those are gates. So as Axel's trying to mentally prepare and looking at references of himself, I was like, hey, I know it's last minute, but I actually need subway gates. And I asked him, do you know what a turnstile is? I just found out tonight. All this time I was mixing up Hakari's curse technique and his domain expansion and assuming that doors were used for everything, which is not the case, which really didn't change anything in terms of how I understood the manga, but in terms of recreating it in real life, that was an issue. I don't think he was super pleased, but he said yes. And during that week, I was also working like usual, planning another collaboration with another company that was happening in the same week. And something else was going on, I can't remember what, but essentially I was busy. And sadly not sleeping much, which I do not endorse, but that was what happened. So as I was editing my portion of the video and waiting for Axel to get his portion done, I realized that something felt a bit empty. The train sound itself was fine, but sonically it just needed more. And then I realized, I need to do sound design. I'm not a Foley artist, I don't do sound design, I don't really enjoy audio editing. I barely do it occasionally because I did used to be a musician, so I have an ear. But I told myself, you know what, go big or go home. I do actually enjoy watching videos about Foley every now and then. I've seen videos about sound design, I'm a very observant person. So it's not like I was going in completely cluelessly. I'm a very big advocate for learning about different mediums outside of your hobby. When people ask me how do I get better, I sometimes say to look outside of the thing that you're creating. So I will watch videos about animation, music production, fashion and makeup, things that I'm not necessarily working on all the time or very good at or trying to become an expert on, but things that will directly help me when I create my own content. So in that moment, I was going through like a filing cabinet in my brain trying to figure out like all the sound effects I've ever saved, every video I've ever watched about sound effects, thinking about environment and layering. And the reason sound design is so scary for me is because I remember there was a content creator that I used to watch who was a videographer. He was one of my first inspirations. And one day he tried to do a bunch of sound design for his video and everyone hated it. And he got flamed hard to the point where he had to take down the video, hire an actual sound designer and re-upload it. And so ever since then, I've just had this fear because I know that I don't know anything about audio mixing or actually creating sound design. Most of the time when I vibe and make my content and I go off of feels, I'm not actually just vibing. I'm going off of years of experience and I'm able to problem solve and make educated guesses. But in this case, I don't really have experience. So the vibing really is just vibing. So I don't even know how good or bad I actually am. I contacted my voice actor friend Danny to see if I could use her train sound effect that she used in her viral sound.
In other words, in the 4 minutes and 11 seconds.
I started to overlay some various whoosh and riser sound effects. Then I began to add in some train bells, some ambient train station noises, and train horns, so the audio went from this to this. I don't know if a professional would call that doo-doo or good, but to me, it felt good enough and I was proud of it. And I want to emphasize again that this was an artistic decision. We have no idea what Hakari's domain expansion is going to sound like, how it's going to be manifested. This is all speculation and just me being an artist. It takes place in an underground train station, so the train sound effect probably won't even happen. But within the JJK community, the train sound effects have been pretty prevalent and strongly associated with his domain expansion. So the sound effects just felt like a very fun and fitting element. And yes, the domain expansion was probably on the smaller side. It was not a 1-to-1 ratio. It was more of an artistic representation of a domain expansion. And this again is because this video was originally filmed as a promotional video. The original video that I posted to the song was a paid promo, therefore, although I had creative freedom and this really was a cosplay video for me in a way to bring something to life and actually do an intense edit, there were some aspects of the video that were still influenced by making content that's supposed to help promote the song. For example, the pacing, the framing, the way that we use the domain expansion ball to show the lyrics. This is also why when I emphasize that when people critique content creation or whatever media they're looking at, they understand the frame and reference and the conditions of the creators. Because in the same way that I saw the JJK promo video and knew that some of those animations were not a literal representation of how things worked in the manga or how they will work in the anime, I would hope, but I know I can't expect, that people would understand that certain things in my videos are not always literal direct depictions of the anime or the manga. Some people really hated the domain expansion ball, which it is what it is. Again, limited time, resources, experiences, and references. They mostly based the idea of the domain expansion ball off of the JJK promo. It looked like the video showcased two different representations, one being a very glossy, glass-like domain expansion, the other being very matte. And I really couldn't tell if those changes were purely artistic or simply how those domain expansions looked in the respective environments. And the truth of the matter is Axel only had 3 days to edit because he was so busy, so I just decided to go in between and go for some sort of frosted glass look with a little bit of reflection, but a lot of the darkness concentrating towards the center. As Axel worked on that stuff, I started to contact my photography friend Russ. That way we could schedule a shooting day to film outside with his nice camera, and I didn't have to worry about doing everything by myself. And then I began storyboarding the entire project, not only to make it a promo video that met all the requirements, but to also make sure it looks like a legit cosplay video that I could just repost with other music as well. A fun fact about this cosplay is that I cosplayed Hakari during the hottest months of the year, which means that for pretty much any content that you see me outside with blonde hair in, I was burning up. When I did my photo shoot in Chicago, that was the hottest day of the year at the time. Luckily, our shooting day for this video ended up only being 85 degrees, which was the coolest day so far, but it was definitely still hot enough. I had like 3 hours of sleep. I missed breakfast. I was dehydrated. I was wearing a black hoodie. I was focused. I was stressed. It was like the Sukuna situation all over again. But I actually did stop the shoot a bit early because I was assessing myself and my health. And I realized that after a certain point, I was starting to get a little bit too tired and it was going to get dangerous if I pushed myself any further. So I just took a risk and I called it. And my friend Russ was like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "It doesn't matter at this point. I'm trying to be safe." The video was only what, like 5 different shots, but those 5 shots took us 2 hours of communicating, trial and error, attempting different shots. At this point, I hit up my friend Jay and I was like, "Hey, I know it's last minute, but can you voice a few lines for me?" Because it feels like we should have some sort of voice in there. Which was a little bit of pressure because I've never heard anyone try to voice Hakari before. It's always been Kashimo. And Jay had actually been practicing and coming to me for what I think Hakari's voice would sound like. And I was kind of coaching him, matching what I think would sound like to what Jay was able to bring to the table. So luckily by the time I had reached out to him, even though it was just a singular line, he had already been practicing and was familiar with the character. And then he also added a few environment effects to it to give it some more pizzazz.
Domain expansion. Idle Death Gamble!
And then after that, Axel was finally ready with all the assets. Axel was the MVP of this entire project because he really did create the gates and the sphere from scratch in 3 days with no prior experience before and after. It was fantastic, but there were a couple of issues. Even though Axel and I kept in close contact, he couldn't always ask me for my feedback because we basically had opposite sleep schedules for like an entire week. The video was due on a Friday and Axel finished editing everything that Friday at 9 a.m. I think he actually napped until like 1 a.m. that Friday and then woke up to start editing. And I went to bed from like 3 a.m. that Friday until 9 a.m. So right when I woke up, I get a message that, "Hey, he's done." This was so chaotic. You have no idea. This was a mess. Not like the worst mess, but it was like, I can't believe this is happening. But instead of just sending me the gates, he sent them already composited within the video footage. And he didn't have time to redo that because Blender takes a long time for things to render. So I'm not gonna lie, I was nervous at this point. I was hoping to have the video done 2 days prior on Wednesday and spend the rest of the week working on details and whatever, but now it's 9 a.m. Friday. I lied to Axel and said it was okay, even though I wasn't sure if it was gonna be okay, but I trusted in my ability to fix anything. I was like, "Hey, you know what? I'm an editor. I got this. I can figure it out." And I was like, "Go to bed. You've done more than enough." And I'm pretty sure I worked on it straight from 9 a.m. until 4 or 5 p.m. that day. I cleared my entire schedule, and after that, I was just exhausted. I basically masked out the gates, flipped the direction that they were going in, then I masked out their opacity to make them look like they were vanishing into the distance. Then I placed it on top of the unedited footage. The goal was to make this video aesthetically pleasing or pretty, exciting, and disorienting. I added some shadows for each of the gates to make it a little bit more realistic. Again, this isn't my specialty, so I wasn't really stressing too much about that and making it hyper realistic. I added some chromatic aberration around everything except my body to make it feel like everything around me was losing its integrity. Then I added more chromatic aberration specifically around the gates because those things are basically smashing through reality. So I imagine them creating some sort of distortion while they're doing that. I definitely spent some time debating on how blurry and incoherent I want the gates to be because on one hand, from the way they're drawn in the manga, obviously they're moving very quickly, so motion blur would make sense. But on the other hand, it sucks that it's the first time that we revealed something like this and you don't necessarily get a clear picture of all the detail that went into everything. And I really wanted to show off Axel's artistry. But I compromised by telling myself that I'll have more photos and more videos in the future that will actually be able to show Axel's artistry a bit more and really highlight all the detail that he put into those dang gates because they were beautiful. They were gorgeous. I was such a proud editing friend. It is really cool when someone else is just as detail oriented and a little bit concerning in terms of content creation as you are. Back to the editing, I also masked out some radial blur and together with some keyframing, some speed ramping, and a few other minor details, I brought my vision to life. A pretty, hype, disorienting scene. I've said this about 3 or 4 times now this year, but this was probably my favorite edit of the year. Probably the most difficult edit of the year, which is amazing because I've been outdoing myself and surprising myself multiple times this year. But this video project in particular really embodied the power of friendship. So anime, I know. Because honestly, alone, I did not have the time nor talent to do this. This never would have happened. So thank you to all the friends who helped me to help bring this cosplay to life.